Hey everyone, let's jump right into a really fascinating document today. We're looking at a study guide from the Bukit Zaitun Ministry, or BZM, and it covers Deuteronomy chapter 19. What's absolutely incredible about this text is how it takes these ancient laws and connects them directly to our modern spiritual lives. I mean, we're going to unpack how a society literally thousands of years ago managed this incredibly delicate balance between swift justice and radical mercy. And as you'll see, that ancient blueprint, it is shockingly relevant to how we live, how we work, and how we build community right now. Let's get into it.
Right off the bat, Deuteronomy 19:15 is the absolute anchor for this entire chapter. The study guide highlights this specific verse because, well, it establishes God's foundational standard for truth and justice. And the rule is actually pretty simple, but it is profound. In the face of any accusation, a single witness is never enough. It always requires 2 or 3. Just think about the gravity of that for a second. We're talking about an ancient world here. No forensic science, no video evidence, nothing. Your word could literally end someone's life. So this standard wasn't just some legal loophole. It was a divine safeguard put in place specifically to protect the innocent from malicious rumors. It's an ancient standard for sure, but man, it still demands rigorous truth from us today.
And that brings us to a really compelling question. Where do we actually find protection when we make mistakes? And on the flip side, how do we uphold true justice? That's our starting point for today's journey. We are going to explore exactly what happens when ancient law collides with modern mercy. Because look, we all mess up, right? And sometimes those mistakes have absolutely catastrophic consequences. When that happens, is the universe just waiting to crush us, or is there a safety net? Let's see how this text handles that tension.
Okay, here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, introduction on justice and refuge. Second, the first law on establishing cities of refuge. Third, the second law covering punishment for intentional murder. Fourth, the third law on witnesses and boundaries. And finally, our conclusion with response and declaration.
Starting with Section 1, Introduction, Justice, and Refuge.
To really get this text, we have to look at how the guide frames God's core nature. It presents this fascinating dual nature. On one hand, he is a God of righteous, strict judgment. But simultaneously, he's our ultimate refuge. He fiercely protects the innocent, while making absolutely sure the guilty face justice. So he's holy, just, and entirely loving, all at the exact same time. Grasping this specific balance is basically the key to unlocking the whole chapter. Because think about it, if you were only a judge, we'd all be destroyed. But if you were only a refuge without any justice, evil would just run rampant.
Moving to Section 2, the first law, Establishing the Cities of Refuge. So, the guide draws this stark, really visceral contrast between unintentional and intentional acts. Picture this ancient scenario from the text. You're out chopping wood in the forest with a friend. Suddenly, the heavy iron axe head just flies off the wooden handle and tragically strikes your neighbor, killing them. That is unintentional. It is a horrific tragedy, yes, but it's completely an accident. But lying in wait with malice, scheming in the dark to take someone's life, that's intentional. The cities of refuge were designed specifically and exclusively to protect the person who made that fatal but completely accidental mistake.
According to the first 10 verses here, these cities served 3 main historical purposes. First, obviously, they shielded that unintentional killer. Second, and this is wild, they cut off the vicious cycle of private revenge by the so-called blood avenger. Here's a surprising historical fact. Back in that era, the closest living relative of a victim, the blood avenger, actually had the legal and cultural right to hunt down the killer. It was just this chaotic system of immediate retaliation. So the cities of refuge deliberately interrupted that whole cycle. And third, they ensured the case went to a fair public trial, instead of just ending in some mob justice on the side of a dirt road.
Now, here's where the guide builds a really powerful bridge to our spiritual reality today. Just as ancient Israelites ran desperately, dropping everything and running toward a physical city for safety, believers today run to Jesus for forgiveness. He is the ultimate refuge. And because of this, modern spiritual communities, like BZM, have to model this exact same dynamic. They need to be safe spaces for healing and restoration, not just courts that rush to condemn people. When someone in our community makes an unintentional mistake, our first instinct shouldn't be to play the blood avenger, right? We need to act as the gates of the refuge city, welcoming them in to heal.
All right, Section 3, the second law, Punishment for Intentional Murder. Okay, the tone of the text takes a dramatic, severe shift right here. We go from profound mercy for the innocent and pivot to absolute zero tolerance for malice.
Show no pity, the text commands. The guide points out that God absolutely detests intentional hatred and premeditated harm. In this specific case, the intentional murderer is actually dragged right out of the refuge city and handed over to the blood avenger to face total, uncompromising justice. There is zero sanctuary for calculated cruelty.
So what does this actually mean for us today? Well, we obviously aren't ancient judges handing people over to executioners, but the guide cleverly translates this ancient capital punishment into a stark warning for modern congregations. Drawing on Ephesians chapter 4, it insists that we have to swiftly root out toxic behaviors, things like bitterness, hatred, slander, malice. The text views these as forms of spiritual and emotional murder that simply cannot be allowed to spread. Just as intentional murder defiled the physical land in ancient times, unchecked malice will absolutely destroy the fabric of a healthy community today.
Let's look at Section 4, the third law, witnesses and boundaries.
You know, maintaining the purity of a community isn't only about handling massive crises like murder, it's also about everyday integrity. Verses 14 through 19 give us two very physical rules. Never move your neighbor's boundary stone and never convict someone based on a single witness. Think about an agrarian society. Moving a boundary stone, even just a few inches in the dead of night, literally meant stealing your neighbor's livelihood. You were stealing their inheritance, their family's entire future. It was an act of profound greed. Both of these laws are specifically designed to protect vulnerable people from exploitation and false accusations.
Now, when discussing false witnesses, the guide brings up a really famous theological concept, lex talionis, or what we know as an eye for an eye. Now wait, surprisingly, this was not an excuse for barbaric revenge. Often, we hear that phrase and we immediately think of unhinged vengeance. But the guide clarifies that this rule was actually invented to limit violence. It ensured proportional fairness. It was literally a cap on punishment. The false witness receives the exact punishment they tried to inflict on the accused. So if you lied to get someone fined, you pay the fine. It's brilliant. It instilled a healthy, holy fear within the community, stopping perjury right in its tracks.
From those historical laws, we can extract three vital spiritual principles for our lives today. First, refusing to move physical boundary stones translates directly into maintaining absolute, unshakable integrity in your personal and professional life. No taking shortcuts. Second, requiring true witnesses translates into rejecting gossip, shutting down rumors, and just flat out refusing to entertain false stories in your community. When you consistently live this out, it cultivates a true reverence and a holy fear for God, and honestly, it elevates the standard for everyone around you.
Finally, Section 5, Conclusion, Response, and Declaration.
The BZM Guide doesn't just want us to analyze these ancient laws academically, it's a real call to action. The three main takeaways here are super clear and pretty challenging. 1. When you fail and you're broken, run to Jesus as your refuge. Don't wait. 2. In your daily life, live with unyielding integrity and justice. Refuse to move the boundary stones of truth. And 3. Uphold the holiness of your community through gentle, loving correction. We are literally called to be a people who hold both justice and mercy in perfectly balanced hands.
To really cement these teachings, the text ends with 4 incredibly powerful declarations. And hey, these aren't just empty phrases to passively read off a screen. They're a solemn community commitment that's meant to be lived out loud. We declare God is our refuge. We commit to living with integrity. We declare that God's righteous spirit reigns here, and we stand firm as a people who fear the Lord. When a community actually aligns around these truths, they become an unstoppable force for good and a literal sanctuary for the hurting.
Before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with these questions to reflect on. Where in your own life do you desperately need to run to Jesus right now? How are you going to guard your personal boundaries and integrity against the temptation of greed? And what is your active role in keeping your community just and holy? I really hope this deep dive into Deuteronomy 19 has challenged your perspective and equipped you for the week ahead. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.